The image is seared into history. In the heart of Milan, a mangled corpse swings from a metal girder. It is Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, the once revered leader of Fascist Italy. Gone is the swaggering dictator who held a nation in his grip. In death he is a grotesque spectacle, a symbol of defeat and the people's fury. How did this man who had ruled with an iron fist for over 2 decades meet such an ignominious end? The answer lies in the chaotic final days of World War II as the fascist regime crumbled around its founder. April 1945. The Allied forces were closing in on all fronts. The once mighty Italian army was in disarray. Mussolini, abandoned by his allies and facing imminent defeat, made a desperate bid for freedom. Disguised as a German soldier, he joined a convoy fleeing north towards the Swiss border. He carried with him his mistress, Clara Petacci, who refused to leave his side. Their escape, however, was ill-fated. The convoy, a mix of German soldiers and Italian fascists, was a motley crew united by fear. They travelled mostly at night, the roads teeming with refugees and Allied patrols. Mussolini, once a figure of boundless energy, was now a shadow of his former self. He was exhausted, his face drawn, his spirit broken, yet a flicker of hope remained, hope that he could escape the net closing around him. On April 27, 1945, the convoy reached the village of Dongo, a small, picturesque settlement nestled near the serene waters of Lake Como. The beauty of the surroundings stood in stark contrast to the grim events that were about to unfold. At a partisan checkpoint, the convoy was stopped. The Italian partisans, who had been fighting tirelessly against fascist forces, were on high alert. They had been tipped off about a convoy carrying high-ranking fascist officials attempting to flee northward. The partisans, members of the Italian resistance movement, were deeply suspicious of the German soldiers accompanying the convoy. Their sharp eyes scanned every face, every uniform, searching for something or someone out of place. They began a thorough search of the vehicles. Weapons, documents, and fascist paraphernalia were uncovered, each discovery adding to their growing unease. The tension in the air was palpable as they realized the convoy was no ordinary group of soldiers. And then, amidst the chaos of the search, came a moment of stunned recognition. The partisans exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to shock. Urbano Lazzaro, one of the partisans, approached a truck with a sense of foreboding. He pulled back a blanket, revealing a figure huddled beneath it. The man's face was unmistakable. It was Benito Mussolini, the once powerful dictator of Italy. His attempt to escape disguised as a German soldier had failed. The man who had ruled with an iron fist now cowered in the back of a truck, his escape plan in tatters. The partisans took Mussolini into custody, along with his mistress, Clara Petacci, and other members of the convoy. The dictator, who had once commanded armies and inspired fear, was now a prisoner, his power stripped away. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final act of defiance. Mussolini offered no resistance. He seemed to understand that his time had run out, that the end of his reign was inevitable. His face bore the weight of defeat, his once fiery demeanor replaced by a weary resignation. The man who had once been the embodiment of fascist ideology now appeared as a shadow of his former self. That night, Mussolini was held in a small makeshift cell. The partisans, many of whom had suffered under his regime, now stood guard over the man who had once been their oppressor. It was a moment heavy with irony and historical significance. Mussolini's regime, built on propaganda, fear and violence, had crumbled. The symbols of his power, once omnipresent, were now relics of a dark chapter in history. His dream of a fascist empire had turned to ashes. The following day, Mussolini and Clara Petacci faced their fate. Their capture marked the end of an era, a turning point in Italy's history. The dictator's fall was complete, and the world would soon bear witness to the final chapter of his story. Clara Petacci, just 28 years old and deeply in love with Mussolini, had been given a choice: escape while she still could. The opportunity to flee was not just a chance to save her life, but also to distance herself from the chaos and danger that surrounded Mussolini in his final days. Yet, For Clara, the idea of leaving him was unthinkable. Her love for him was not fleeting or conditional. It was a bond that she believed transcended even the inevitability of death. But she refused. Her life was so deeply entwined with his, and she would not abandon him in his final hours. To Clara, Mussolini was not just a man, he was her world. She had stood by him through triumphs and failures, through adoration and hatred from the public. Now, as the walls closed in, she chose to remain by his side, even as the shadow of death loomed over them both. She clung to him as the partisans led them away, her face a mask of defiance and despair. The journey was harrowing, filled with the jeers of captors and the weight of knowing what lay ahead. Clara's resolve never wavered. Her grip on Mussolini's arm was not just an act of love, but also a silent declaration of her choice to share his fate, no matter how grim. "Where he dies, I die," she declared, her words echoing the depth of her devotion. These were not empty words spoken in a moment of passion. They were a solemn vow, a promise that she would not let him face the end alone. Clara's loyalty was unwavering, even as the reality of their situation became increasingly dire. It was, in many ways, a love story set against a backdrop of war, tyranny, and ultimately death. Their relationship was controversial, marked by scandal and secrecy, but to Clara, it was the most profound connection of her life. In a world torn apart by conflict, their bond was her anchor, even as it pulled her toward an inevitable end. The execution was swift and brutal. There was no trial, no chance for last words or pleas for mercy. The partisans, hardened by years of war and resistance, carried out their grim task with cold efficiency. For Clara and Mussolini, the end came not with fanfare, but with the deafening crack of gunfire. On April 28, 1945, near the village of Giulino di Mezzegra, Mussolini and Petacci were lined up against a wall. The quiet rural setting stood in stark contrast to the violence that was about to unfold. The village, nestled in the Italian countryside, would forever be etched into history as the site of their final moments. The partisan executioner Walter Audizio opened fire. His actions were not just the culmination of years of resistance against fascism, but also a moment that symbolized the end of an era. For the partisans, this was justice. For Clara and Mussolini, it was the end of their story. The shots echoed through the quiet countryside, marking the end of an era. The sound of gunfire shattered the stillness, a stark reminder of the violence that had defined so much of the war. As the echoes faded, so too did the lives of Mussolini and Clara, leaving behind a legacy that would be debated for generations. Mussolini's body slumped to the ground, riddled with bullets. The man who had once commanded a nation now lay lifeless, his ambitions and dreams reduced to nothing. For Clara, this was the moment she had chosen to face, the price of her devotion paid in full. Petacci fell beside him, her final embrace a testament to her unwavering loyalty. In death, as in life, she remained by his side, her love and devotion immortalized in the tragic tableau of their final moments. Clara's story is one of love, sacrifice, and the unyielding power of human connection, even in the face of unimaginable darkness. The news of Mussolini's death spread like wildfire. It was a moment that marked the end of an era, a turning point for a nation that had endured decades of oppression under his iron-fisted rule. Across Italy, the announcement was met with a cacophony of emotions: relief, anger, and a thirst for justice. For many, it was not just the death of a man, but the symbolic collapse of a regime that had brought war, suffering, and division to their homeland. Italy, for so long under his oppressive rule, erupted in a mixture of jubilation and fury. In the streets, people celebrated the end of fascism, waving flags and singing songs of liberation. Yet beneath the surface of celebration lay a simmering rage, a collective memory of the atrocities, betrayals, and hardships inflicted by Mussolini's regime. The people were not content with his death alone. They sought a reckoning, a moment to confront the ghosts of their suffering. The partisans, who had fought tirelessly against the fascist regime, took it upon themselves to deliver this reckoning. They loaded Mussolini's lifeless body, along with that of his mistress, Clara Petacci, onto a truck. These were not just corpses. They were symbols of a regime that had terrorized the nation. The partisans knew their destination. Milan, the city that had once been the epicenter of Mussolini's power, now chosen as the stage for his ultimate humiliation. Their destination, Piazzale Loreto, a square forever stained with the blood of resistance fighters. Just a year earlier, this very place had witnessed one of the darkest chapters of the war. 15 partisans captured and executed by fascist forces had been left here as a grim warning to those who dared to resist. Now, the square would serve as the site of a grim reversal of fate. It was a deliberate and symbolic act. By bringing Mussolini's body to Piazza Loreto, the partisans sought to reclaim the narrative of resistance and justice. This was not just about vengeance, it was about making a statement to the world. The square, once a symbol of fascist terror, would now bear witness to the people's triumph over tyranny. A year earlier, at that very spot, fascist thugs had executed 15 partisans. Their bodies had been left on display, a grotesque warning to anyone who dared to oppose Mussolini's rule. The memory of that atrocity was still fresh in the minds of the Milanese, fueling their anger and their need for justice. Now, the tables were turned. The oppressors had become the oppressed, their lifeless bodies dragged to the very place where they had once instilled fear. For the partisans and the people of Milan, this was a moment of catharsis, a chance to confront the physical remnants of a regime that had caused so much pain. The bodies, dumped unceremoniously onto the cobblestones, became a focal point for the pent-up rage of the Milanese. Crowds gathered, their emotions raw and unfiltered. For years they had been silenced, their voices suppressed by fear and propaganda. Now they had a chance to express their anger, their grief, and their defiance. The crowd, a sea of faces contorted in anger, surged forward. They shouted, they cursed, and they wept. This was not just an act of vengeance, it was an outpouring of years of suffering and frustration. The square became a theater of raw human emotion, a place where the people could finally confront the man who had brought so much misery to their lives. They kicked, spat upon, and mutilated the corpses, their actions a visceral expression of hatred and a desire for retribution. It was a brutal and chaotic scene, but for many, it felt like justice. The desecration of Mussolini's body was not just an act of revenge, it was a symbolic end to an era of oppression. A moment that would be etched into the collective memory of a nation seeking to rebuild itself from the ashes of war.